Thank you, everyone, for having me here. But yeah, as Jess mentioned, I'm a director of, director of data and AI tech. But my background is really working within performance marketing before moving more into the technical space and really trying to help our clients really understand some of these age-old questions of marketing and how we can use data and AI to solve them. And today, we really want to talk about the concept of incrementality within our measurement strategies. And what I really mean by that, and to one of Jacques' points earlier, what is the actual real impact of my marketing channel on my bottom line? How can I separate that from what is baseline? And starting to talk about how we can solve for that issue with the air conditioners as well. This is the perfect experience for us to be able to actually solve that. So I want to dive into the detail on some of these topics. If you've seen, probably one of these presentations from Baudouin or from myself or many other players in this space, you'll have seen that concept of, the triangle of measurement and triangulation and UMM and a lot of these key buzzwords. And really want to walk through how those actually work in practice and some tips for you to take you from kind of just starting out. We saw those percentages of so many people are only using one methodology to actually using them all in combination and becoming a market leader within the space. But yeah, as Baudouin alluded to, unfortunately, true measurement can't be achieved with a single approach. There is no silver bullet, right? A lot of people with the hype around MMM kind of seem to think it's going to solve all of their problems for you, but unfortunately, that's not really the case. And what we really need to do is blend all of these methodologies together, because they all have their own strengths, but they all have their own weaknesses as well. So if we take our old faithful attribution that we've been, living and breathing by for the last 10 years, super powerful in the way that it's really fast to insights. We get real-time insights. It's really accessible, really easy to use. And it historically has done a really good job of being able to measure quite a breadth of things. The scope of its measurement's been quite strong. But unfortunately, we know that's changing quite a lot at the minute. We've seen with, increasing walled gardens, massive signal loss, that attribution's not really as powerful as what it used to be. But the main challenge we have with attribution is the ability for it to actually measure anything to do with incrementality. If you think about it, you can have the most advanced MTA model in the world. It still does very little to actually measure the impact of what would have happened if a user hadn't seen the ad, right? So it doesn't really actually measure anything in terms of incrementality. So to solve for that, we need to look at other methodologies, like econometric modeling, like MMM, for instance. And MMM is an amazing tool, and really excited about Meridian, and been playing a lot more with Meridian in recent months. The benefit of that is that the breadth of what it can measure is incredibly vast, right? We can measure anything. And what's more is that we can actually measure it against the business metrics that the CFO is looking at. We're not just looking at what Google Ads said or what Meta said. We're actually tying that back to the tangible business goal that you have, whether that be your on-site sales, it could be on-site plus your in-store sales, it could add an Amazon component to that. Really we can measure the impact of any marketing effort to that target variable. The downside of MMM, again, as we spoke about briefly earlier with Baudouin, there is an issue with you need a significant amount of data to be able to run it. And what that means is that sometimes MMMs can be at a higher level than we would ideally like them to be, just to make sure we can get that level of data. And what that means is that there is going to be some degree of inaccuracy. It is a bit more top level than what a GA is able to do and go down to the finest granular detail. So both of these can help solve each other's problems. But again, there's still some issues there. It is a model with MMM. It's still not 100% accurate. And this is where experiments come in. And I think this will be talked a lot about in the next talk. But this is the real key to making this whole system work. Experiments, can really hone in on an individual hypothesis or test case and get really down into the details and is your truest measure of how incremental a channel or a tactic might be. The problem being is that they're quite invasive to set up, and you can't run millions of them at the same time because you need to be able to isolate the signals. So really what we need to do is use all of these things in conjunction, or to use the first buzzword of the talk, triangulate. And essentially, what we're trying to do is use all of these tools in combination and triangulate on what is actually happening through the different methods. And this is often called about, again, to use another buzzword, unified marketing measurement, or UMM. Now, you probably have all seen these acronyms and these buzzwords before. So what I really wanted to do now is actually talk to you about how you can go away and put these things into practice and actually use them in conjunction rather than it being, I've been guilty of in many presentations before, just talk about it at a high level and not really going into the detail. So the first point that you can really bring in immediately to help your measurement practice and your strategy is making sure that you're using experiments to calibrate your models. So we already talked about before how MTA, you can have the most expensive MTA in the world, it's still not going to measure incrementality. So using a spot experiment about an individual channel and understanding a bit more about the incremental value of another channel can help you validate what your attribution system is telling you. And for a lot of advertisers, I know that's still a last click attribution model, which is in this day and age is kind of crazy. But this is how we can move beyond that and start to help the CFO or the purse string holders understand that there is more to what just GA is telling you or what your Google Ads pixel is telling you. But most importantly, it's really important to use those experiments to qualify and validate your MMM. So as we said, an MMM is always going to be inaccurate to a certain degree. It is a model and it is somewhat top level. But what you can do is upload all that information from your really spot centered, really focused experiments, can use that to actually validate and improve the accuracy of what your MMM is telling you. So by doing that, we can really improve the quality of the MMM model and make sure it's actually calibrated to what you're seeing on the ground. But then how do you understand really where you need to build those spot experiments? How can we actually find the points where an experiment will actually help benefit my model, both from an MMM and an MTA perspective? And the trick there really is to actually use the delta between what those two systems are telling you as an area to start running more experiments. So let's take YouTube as an example. For those of you, again, some advertisers are still using a last click model. YouTube is always underweighted within those kind of models, whether it be in GA or even within Google Ads itself. But of course, an MMM designed to actually understand incremental business value, YouTube is one of the most attention-focused, attention-driven channels out there and will score really, really highly. So again, if we want to try and address, what is actually true between those 2 points, this is where we can start running these kind of A/B tests or user-based tests or geo-tests that Baudouin was talking about, or even just looking at something like a causal impact test to really understand what the incremental value of that YouTube investment is. And this is how we can really find those points to actually drive those experiments to help improve the whole process. And then finally, once you're really happy with what your MMM is telling you and you've validated all those results with various experiments, it's then about using that iROAS, that incremental return on your ad spend figure, rather than your ROAS, to actually drive your investment decisions and drive the way that you change your budgets. So with all these 3 things in combination, we get the real-time element from the attribution, we get the really specific targeted view from experiments, and MMM really being the glue that holds it all together and helps scale up what we're able to do with our experiments. And this is where we can get to with this approach. So now we've kind of established the base methodology. What we'll go through now is kind of a path to how you can get to the ultimate measurement methodology. What do we need to bring in the initial stages? How can we make sure we have the incremental best practices? How can we, bring in those rapid results like Mike was talking about before? But then how can we work smarter, not harder? How can we actually bring in AI and automation to make this whole process easier, bring some scalability, democratize a lot of this detailed information, reduce the reliance that we have on our data scientists that I know are a valuable resource in everybody's business. And then finally, how can we push on to actually market-leading innovation? What kind of generative growth can we bring in? How can we move beyond just media when we're looking at our MMM models? How can we start to factor in things like pricing, audience, creative quality? Because we talked about it earlier, Jacques talked about it earlier, that creative is such a vital part of any kind of marketing strategy and is often overlooked. We haven't really nailed the way that we actually validate the incremental value of creative yet, but through these kind of methodologies with AI built into it is really our ticket to be able to do that. So firstly, how can we nail the best practices? What are the rapid results? And we kind of talk about this whole process of triangulating through these methodologies as seamless measurement. And really, the guidebook that we see here, the challenge that we see, many advertisers kind of come to us with a project that's sort of failed before it's begun. They've just kind of half-assed an attempt at an MMM and just figured it would work and tell them and fix all their problems, but that is not the case. Can I use the term half-assed in Dutch? It works? Yeah? Okay. But really, you know, with MMM on its own, without any kind of prior experiments integrated into it, is really not going to deliver you any kind of value. And Baudouin also mentioned earlier that a lot of people are actually only bucketing up their MMMs into just, this is Google as one piece of the puzzle and feeding that into the model. Whereas in reality, you want to segment that out. You want to look at lower funnel, mid funnel, top funnel, or maybe you want to separate out branded search versus your YouTube investment or your PMAX investment. There's a lot more clever ways to actually split this out to generate a more accurate and more valuable model. But experiments are really the key here. You know, experiments is really an often overlooked art form within the marketing space. I think over the years, it's just become like a separate job that the marketing teams, the media teams maybe do every now and then. But really the trick to actually building the perfect incremental view of your marketing is through a robust and planned experiment schedule. And I think hopefully we'll hear that from booking.com in a minute as well to corroborate that. But this is really how we're going to get value and really understand what is working, what is not, and improve everything else we're doing, particularly within the MMM. Because MMM, you know, needs to be at the heart, but it's the glue that everything's held together. But again, on its own, it's not really going to work. And the final thing here is the single biggest mistake that we see advertisers make is really kind of entrusting the design and the deployment of their MMM to either just their media teams or just their data and measurement teams. And the reality is you need a blend of both skills to be able to actually run a successful project here. You know, if you hand it over just to the data team, you know, who are they going to tell you to how much headroom there still is within branded search? What do they know about the decay rate of YouTube? You really need the media teams to collaborate there. But if you leave it just to the media teams, they're going to miss out a lot of, you know, the data scientists' best practices that, again, are really vital to making this work. So really you need a blend of the two. And this leads us on to kind of what we talk about in terms of our MMM success factors. And Mike wasn't lying earlier when he said he didn't get those A's from ChatGPT. He just stole them from my slide, actually. So these are my A's. But firstly, the really key things to making our MMM project succeed boil down to these 4 points. The first one being it needs to be accessible. So we've actually worked around the Robin model, around the Meridian model, to actually create a UI that means that anyone can come in and interact with the project. So it doesn't mean that we have this huge bottleneck where the data scientist or the data engineer is the only person who can come in, integrate an experiment, tweak a parameter. We can actually get the media teams to be far more involved in the process. So what this means is, firstly, much quicker and less expensive turnaround because we can actually specialize the labor that goes into these projects, and we don't have that bottleneck with the data scientists. But it also really helps with is getting stakeholder buy-in. You know, if, again, this whole project boils down to the 2-3 people in your data team who only know what the hell is going on with your MMM project, it's going to fail, you know? And by bringing more stakeholders, being able to actually contribute to the project and be invested in the project, we can make a much greater success. Secondly, we really want it to be actionable. An MMM project's not worth anything if you're not doing anything with the actual insights it's delivering. So again, we focus on really trying to make everything easily available to interpret, and then download and upload into platforms, and making sure that we're making the right budget decisions within our campaigns focused on what the actual incremental value of those channels actually are. And within, again, we've worked on a system, it's pleased to know that Google haven't worked this out yet, but we have, how you can integrate experiments very easily within a UI to actually filter into Meridian. So again, super key to make this whole setup work. Third point, we need it to be agile. Again, a lot of MMM projects end up becoming, and I'm sure it's a barrier for a lot of you, come with a hefty price tag because often they require a monthly or quarterly refresh of all the data, doing all that data gathering we were talking about earlier. It's painstaking. It's probably the hardest part of actually running an MMM project is just gathering all the data. So doing that over and over again every time you want to run it is just not cost efficient, and it actually makes for a worse user experience because the data is not there when you need it. So what we always try and push with all of our clients is making sure that we do a lot of the upfront work actually modeling and pipelining all the data into the model to make sure that data is always on, always accessible, and negate the need for those constant expensive data refreshes. And then the final point is that we want to be agnostic. So we initially built our system around Robin, but we now rolled it out for Meridian. And often a lot of people come with the questions, Bodo, I mentioned earlier, I think, about the question of Google marking their own homework. I know that's a big fear for everyone, and similarly with Meta and Robin. In my experience, I can tell you that fear is slightly overblown. But what we try and do to help alleviate those fears and help people manage those conversations is actually run them both. So you can run them side by side, get the same experience, and you can decide which one works for you. And there definitely are various pros and cons between Robin and Meridian. And not just because I'm in the Google office, I'll say that Meridian is probably a bit better. Cool, so that's the basic steps. That's how we can achieve the rapid results and achieve those best practices. Now, how can we kind of automate these processes? And, you know, as we said, MMM can sometimes be come with a costly price number. How can we actually use automation and AI to not only bring that cost down, but also expand the number of people who really understand what the models are telling them? You know, how can we democratize a lot of these insights? So first example of where we've seen this really working well is, again, in that question about how can I really, supercharge my experimentation process. Like I said, it takes a lot more brain power than you really think. There are media effectiveness specialists out there for a reason. It takes quite a lot of understanding to know when you need an experiment, what type of experiment you should run, how it should be set up, how you should integrate it within the MMM. And what we're seeing people do is trying to use AI to actually expand the pool of people who can do that by codifying, their experts into an AI agent. So firstly, we can easily automate that formulation of the hypothesis. We can, like we mentioned before, look at the disparity between the MMM and the MTA and find where there's huge delta, that there is an opportunity to run a test to actually validate and come to an understanding about which model is actually correct. We can then use AI to actually train, we can use AI trained on, our best practices based on, the volume of data you're seeing, the type of channel, actually looking at the geo. In some countries, running geo splits isn't really an option. If you're running a campaign in Australia, New Zealand, for instance, it's really hard to get a fair geo split. So there are best practices that vary by all these different factors. We can codify all of that into an AI agent, so you don't need our best data scientists to do that. You can all work that out on your own. And then finally, we need to automate the process of actually funneling those tests and those experiments, or as Google would call them in Meridian priors, into the MMM model itself. So again, we can automate that entire process. And again, turn what is something that I mentioned requires quite a lot of brain power and quite a lot of understanding into a completely automated flow powered by AI. Taking that a bit further, not only can we just build that whole pipeline, but we can really supercharge our team's understanding of their ability to analyze or query any kind of data set. And this is an example of our tool that we built to actually help try and turn our clients' teams into data scientists. So Google released something a while ago called Cosmos. I don't know if anyone's played around with that. It's a causal impact app that they developed. But really it helps laymen be able to actually start working within a causal impact environment and actually run and design tests. We've taken that whole bunch of steps further by integrating an AI agent within that. So really now anyone with zero data skills would be able to run a causal impact analysis just within this app, and really understand what the true impact of a certain change you made in a campaign or in a targeting setting or in a budget actually had on your bottom line revenue. And what's more, we also have like an AI built into this, which will write a 3-page PDF for you as well if you want to actually present this to anyone who's really into the detail here. So again, with AI, we're able to actually turn our teams and upskill our teams into actually becoming far more powerful when it comes to querying and understanding data. And then finally, for those of you who've actually spent enough time calibrating, working with your MMM that you really deeply believe in the value and the insights that it's giving you, we can actually begin to start automating how we actually activate those insights. So rather than just getting a readout, downloading it, uploading it if you've already done a manual approval layer, you can actually build this to actually write into the APIs of all the media platforms to actually calibrate all those budgets for you. So again, skipping out so many steps, through this all three of these elements, we've actually automated the entire process of doing this whole triangulation thing, which is so complicated. So again, this is what we hope to achieve in terms of the automation element, but of course, there's a lot of issues we need to solve for first in the data cleaning and the data acquisition. But this is what's available for those who are ready for it. And finally, just touch on, how can you push the boundaries and stand out from the pack a bit more? And the thing I really want to focus on is, how can we take it beyond media mix? how can we bring in use cases that look at things just beyond how much you're spending on Google or with this specific tactic in Google versus Facebook, et cetera? And how can we start speaking to the CFOs? Because there's one thing, easily integrating your historic media performance, that's very easily done. Like I say, there's immediate improvements we can make, like bucketing things up to top of funnel within Google versus mid versus lower rather than Google as a whole. But we can also start to integrate, all the different drivers of demand and start to actually solve for some of these issues like how the weather impacts things. Because we can factor in all these different macro trends. So we can factor in, GDP data, we can factor in inflation, we can factor in things like the weather, and this will help us really be able to solve for a lot of these common problems. Next, we also have the amazing ability to actually factor in what the impact of pricing is, or pricing index compared to your competitors in how much incremental growth a media channel actually provides. So we have our own price comparison engine. It's one of the bigger ones in Europe on the Google CSS program. We use this to help build like a comparative pricing for you and actually integrate that into these kind of models. So we can start to answer the question of, did that media channel actually affect things last week, or was it just that we dropped the price by 10%? We can answer those questions for you with these kind of things. And that goes beyond, just pricing. We can also think about how we factor in events, and again, things like weather signals. Then for more advanced advertisers, again, we who are using their audience data in a clever way, and they're actually building a synchronized way they apply their audience to all their different media platforms. We can actually take our analysis beyond just what is the incremental value of advertising on this channel, but actually incremental value of advertising to this audience on this channel, and can begin to factor that into LLMs as well. And then finally, one of the things we're doing a lot of at the minute is using AI to actually score creative, to allow us to build that creative scoring into the way that we run our MMMs, and be able to actually advise our clients on what the incremental value of quality creative is. And this gets us to the point where we can now speak with our clients and go, okay, if you have a couple $100,000 to spend, how much of that should you be investing in media? How much of that should you be investing in creative? Or how much of that should you actually be investing in discounting? What's going to drive you the best possible return? And this kind of engine is exactly what you need to be able to solve for these kind of age-old questions we've all had with how we manage marketing. So just diving into those, quick case study with one of our clients around the pricing point. And this one was super interesting. This was one of our larger retailers, actually. It was in Australia, so pretty far from here. But it was a great case study, so I wanted to share it with you guys. But they actually ran 3 different types of promotions throughout the year. I think they call them gold, silver, and bronze. And what we found by analyzing the impact, the incremental impact of these pricing changes through an MMM over years, was that we found that one of the 3 types of promotions consistently actually had a net negative effect on their business performance. So the discount they were offering actually outweighed any benefit they were seeing in increased traffic or increased conversion rates. And through this process, we were actually able to help them stop running that type of promotion, save a load of money, and benefit the business long run. And again, this is exactly the kind of conversation that the CFO wants to hear us having. And this is where that CMO and CFO can really start to work together to achieve these things. I mentioned, how we use creative within an MMM model, and I realize that's not the easiest thing to necessarily picture in your head. So just to break that down in terms of how we typically do it is, I don't know if any of you have used the ABCD framework that Google offered to kind of validate the performance of creative. No? Well, what we've done is kind of build on that a lot more. So with AI, we're able to understand, exactly what kind of things are occurring within the video, when certain brand messages are landing, what kind of components there are within a video. You can see in this example playing on the right for a client, they wanted to evaluate how environmentally friendly their ad was, and within this video there's a vintage car, so this is actually not that environmentally friendly, so it scored badly. But what we've done is merge all that AI video analysis with the media performance to actually understand what components of media, what brand messages are actually landing and driving the marketing performance. With that, we're able to then score those. So if you imagine that on a scale of 1 to 10, within an MMM, rather than splitting up by media channels, we can split up by spend on creative with a score higher than 7 versus lower than 7. And with that, we're actually able to analyze what the benefit, the incremental benefit of having that high scoring creative is actually driving. And again, get us to that point where we can advise on, is it worth investing more in media or investing more in creative? And then finally, just to leave you with one thing, just again to hammer home the point on how triangulation works, I want to leave you with another case study. This one is around how we invest in search and the incrementality of search versus your organic investments. So with this client, we found that they had a very differing view on the value of Google search between their attribution system in Google Analytics and what the MMM was telling them, right? So Google Analytics was saying search was driving so much value, the MMM wasn't so sure. The incremental value of it is slightly less than what Google Analytics was saying. What we were then able to do is actually see that difference and start running some experiments to actually validate this theory, that search maybe isn't as valuable as what GA says. And through those experiments, we did actually find that we saw some cannibalization of organic when we were running paid, but not 100%. So there was some overlap, but not 100% overlap. So what we were able to do is actually roll out our total search bid algorithm, which is actually designed to only spend money on Google over and above what value the organic's providing. So actually making sure that we're taking investment from areas in Google search that don't drive much incremental value, like let's say your brand exact search term. So for us, advertising on Incubeta as an exact match keyword, versus other areas of search that actually do drive exponential value and incremental value over and above what your organic's driving. So with that, we were able to roll out our bid algorithm, and you can see the impact it had on this graph here. So where that orange line goes haywire is kind of where we implemented this seamless search product. And you can see what value that had for the incremental value that search was having as a channel. And with that, we're able to actually validate the performance of our media tactics, i.e. moving to this new bid strategy through the MMM, because we can see growing iROAS, growing incrementality of Google, over 100% growth, in fact, whilst also, I think some of the fears Google have when we run this product is that we're just saving on the spend. But in reality, we're actually reinvesting that in areas that are driving incremental value. So we actually saw 36% growth in the spend as well. So this is a really great example of how you can do that whole pipeline of measuring your attribution versus your MMM, finding those areas of experimentation, running those experiments, finding the true value, calibrating your MMM, and using your MMM as your barometer of how you should be investing your media and what tactics you should be using within media. MMM is a really great vehicle for us to get out of this bottom of the funnel mindset that we've all been guilty of having over the years and starting to invest in the things that really drive attention and drive traction with our clients, like upper funnel, YouTube, creative. These are the things that people notice and actually builds lasting impact with our clients. And this is really the vehicle for us to get there. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Max. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. Coming back to what Michael shared earlier, I'm trying to find a sweet spot of how to balance over-measuring and using 3 kind of frameworks to measure your campaigns. So what's your advice on that?
So really, there are 3 different, practices. But when you're doing it right, it's all one thing, right? So it should be your MMM really is the glue holding all of these things together. But MMM on its own isn't going to be able to cut it. So the way it works with, let's use Meridian as an example. When you want to integrate any channel, whether it be Facebook investment or you might want to split Facebook retargeting versus Facebook prospecting into a channel. When you add that in, what you often add is something called prior information. So what you already know from your experiments that you've already done. So you might know that prospecting adds this much incremental value. It typically lasts this long. This is the lag between the conversion window. You provide all of that information into the model, and then the model is really what the source of truth is. So the experiments are there to help tweak and improve your model, and that's really what is showing you the incremental value. So your MMM is really the glue that holds it all together, but you do need these 3 different disciplines kind of working together to make your MMM work as best as it possibly can.
Right. So the 2 other frameworks are just sort of inputs for MMM then?
Yeah, you can think of it in that way, yeah. And of course, MMM, isn't going to be able to tell you if you launched TikTok yesterday, it's not going to be able to give you really great reads tomorrow, right? So there is still a lot of value in using some of the attribution best practices and being able to get the real-time feedback for shorter-term tactics. So they still play a role, yeah. But if we're looking about long-term incremental growth, what is really driving incremental revenue, business performance above the baseline or above seasonality, MM's your ticket to doing that.
Right, thanks. One more question.
Sure, go ahead.
So I saw in your presentation the last slide is about IROAS, and that is efficiency of the campaign. Does MMM help with the effectiveness of the campaign, so measure the incremental revenue or profit?
Yeah, essentially when you get a readout from an MMM will look like, it'll tell you, obviously within GA, you have an understanding of what the ROAS of your branded search looks like, right? But what MMM model, which actually looks into the incrementality of a channel, will be able to tell you is what the incremental ROAS is. So actually, what is the incremental benefit, not just the pixel reported benefit over the spend. And with this system, what we've basically done is brought in an optimization to boost the incrementality of search by trying to reduce spend where it's not valuable and put it where it is valuable. And we've used this MMM to actually prove out the value of that tactic. So you can see where the orange line kind of spikes, this is where the IROAS is really kicked off because we've been far more intelligent about the way that we manage our search campaigns.
Thank you very much.
No worries, yeah. Thank you.
Great question, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Give me a few seconds.
So I was wondering, because just now Bodewan has also mentioned, or in general, we know that for marketing mix modeling, you need about 3 years of data. So I guess in this case, we would already have the data ready in order to implement this framework or solutions that you've just mentioned then. Is that correct?
I think in an ideal world, a channel has 2 years worth of data, but I think one of the benefits of Meridian versus Robin, so this is like a Bayesian model versus a regression model, is that when you work with Meridian, you basically are able to upload this prior information about a channel. So let's say you only have 6 months worth of TikTok. Let's say you've just started that again. Don't know why I keep using TikTok. You're able to actually upload, a lot of parameters about what you already know about TikTok. Like you've done these experiments, you know that the incrementality value you believe to be this, you think that the decay rate is this, you think the ad stock rate is this. And what you're able to do is upload those with some degree of probability or uncertainty of how, like an uncertainty variable of how sure you are whether that's true. And what that means is that Meridian's able to ingest that data straight away and actually start to leverage it. And if it disagrees with what your predetermined priors are, it has that flexibility to move. Whereas something like Robin, you kind of just set like windows that are absolute, that it doesn't have the flexibility to go over. So yes, ideally you have 2 years worth of data, but I think one of the benefits of Meridian versus something like Robin, as well as its ability to factor in something called like latent variables, so actually bringing in things like volume of searches rather than just everything back towards revenue, means that it's far more powerful at being able to deal with smaller and more kind of dynamic data sets than, let's say, Robin is.
Okay. And I was also wondering, since you mentioned the ability to embed it directly into the API and then optimize directly, and let's say we already have all the data and insights available, how does that API let's say, implementation look like? So is it basically essentially real-time optimization then?
Yeah, so what you're really using it for largely is budget management. So if we know, again, and if you're really confident you've done all this work validating your MMM, you really believe in what it's reading out to you, we can actually automate what you would manually do anyway. So in most cases, people are kind of manually downloading what the MMM tells them. It says that the iROAS is actually 1.5 times higher than the ROAS. So we recommend, switching your budgets around like this within a scenario planning kind of system. And then you manually check and manually upload. you can automate that entire process. So what you would essentially do is, build right APIs to actually just change the bid structures based on that information and based off your scenario planning. So it's technically not that difficult to do. If you want to get into more like individual bid management, it gets a bit more complicated, but for most people, I think they're just interested in budget management at this stage.
Okay, thank you so much.
No worries.
Awesome, great.
Got
Any other questions? I see Jessica already. Oh, sorry, yes. One more question.
Sorry, I went too long.
Yeah, so I was wondering, do you ever validate the uplift that an experiment shows? And if so, how often you normally do that?
I think, again, with something like Meridian versus Robin, Meridian kind of does that itself. So by uploading your experiment as a prior with that uncertainty window, it has the flexibility to overrule what you've said as your prior information. Whereas as I said, with Robin, you put like very firm parameters in that says you can't go outside of this window that I've given you. Whereas Meridian can take that prior information that you have and kind of say, actually, we think the fit is much better when you do this. And when that happens, and when you can see that, it's kind of negated where you've put that prior information as, is a perfect example of where you need to bring in another experiment. So where the Meridian model has actually taken it into a different direction would be a perfect example for doing a retest to actually double check your assumption, because every test that we do, of course, is true to a time and a place. And that data is constantly evolving, and in an ideal world we have experiments running on everything all the time, but sadly that's not feasible.
Do you have examples?
Well, let's take your example with the air conditioners right now, right? If you ran that uplift test or experimentation right now on your campaign around your air conditioning unit on Facebook, the data of that is going to be vastly different to when you do another experiment if you're doing it in December, right? So it's really important to make sure that you're cognizant of that and constantly reviewing these areas of where I need to drive far more experimentation to kind of validate and adjust. So within our system, actually, to your question about the air conditioners, I don't know how far I have to go back, but you can actually separate out, baselines based on season as well as, holiday, weekday, and intercept. So you can actually see that within the data set. But of course, like I say, it's super variable with things like the weather. So that is a perfect example, I think, of where you might want to have another test if you've done it so long ago, or it's been impacted by such a dynamic potential external factor that you haven't accounted for in the model.